Good evening, and welcome to Restored Lore, your home for old, odd, and obscure stories on YouTube. Tonight's story is An Idyl of the HT by O.H. Lewis. The story was published in the April 1891 edition of Short Stories magazine. We haven't yet had many stories of cowboys in the American West on this channel, and this is an interesting one. So now, let's open our imaginations and begin. It is sunset at the HT Ranch. 4 or 5 cowboys sit gloomily about outside the ranch house, awaiting supper. The Mexican cook has just begun his fragrant task, so a half-hour must elapse before these nomads are fed. Their ponies are turned into the wire pasture. Their big Colorado saddles repose astride the low, pale fence which surrounds the house, and it is evident that their riding is over for the day. Why are they gloomy? Not a boy of them can tell. One is from Princeton, too. They have been partners and compañeros and worked the HT cattle together for months, and nothing ever came in misunderstanding or cloud. The ranch house is their home, and theirs has been the unity of brothers. A week ago, a pretty girl, the daughter of one of the owners, came to the ranch from the east. She was protected in this venture by an old and gnarled aunt, watchful as a ferret, sour as a lime. Not that the pretty girl needs watching. She is indeed in every move propriety's climax. No soft or dulcet reason woos her to the west. She comes on no love errand. She is elegantly and profoundly tired of the east, that is all, and longs for western air and western sights. She has been at the HT Ranch a week, and the boys have met her, every one. The meeting or meetings were marked by awkwardness as to the boys, utter indifference as to the pretty girl. She met them as she met the ponies, cows, horned toads, and other animals domestic and indigenous to eastern New Mexico. While every cowboy was blushingly conscious of her, she was purely and serenely guiltless of giving him a thought. Before this pretty girl came, the boys were friends, and the calm tenor of their relations with each other had never a ripple. She was not there a day before each drew himself insensibly from the others, and a vague hostility shone dimly in their eyes. It was the instinct of the fighting male animal, aroused by the presence of the pretty girl. She, however, proceeded on her daily way, sweetly unconscious of the sentiments she awakened. Men are mere animals. Women are too, for that matter, but they are very different animals from men. The effort the race makes to be other, better, or different than beasts fails. It has always failed. It will always fail. Civilization, culture, is the veriest veneer and famously thin. A year on the plains cracks this veneer, this shell, and leaves the animal exposed. This is by the expanding growth of all that is animal in a man, these attributes of the physical being, fed and pampered by a plains existence. The dark, vague, impalpable differences which cut off each of these creatures from his fellows and inspired him with an unreasoning and unmeasurable hate had grown with the brief week of their existence. A philosopher would look for trouble soon on the HT. "What did you go take my saddle for yesterday, Bill?" said Jack Moore to a boy by the name of Bill Watkins. "'Cause I 'lows I'll ride it some," said Watkins. "Thought it might like to carry a high-grade cow-puncher once." "Well, don't take it no more," said Moore moodily, ignoring the gay insolence in the reply. "Leastwise, don't come a-taking it and saying nothing. You can palaver Americano, can't you? When you aims to ride my saddle again, ask for it. If you can't talk, make signs. And if you can't make signs, shake a bush, but don't go stealing off no saddle of mine no more." "Whatever do you allow is liable to happen if I takes it again tomorrow?" inquired Bill in high scorn. Bill was of a more vivacious temper than Moore. "You takes it again, and I mingles with you a whole lot mighty prompt," replied Moore in a tone of obstinate injury. These boys were brothers in affection before that pretty girl came, and either would have gone afoot all day to lend his saddle to the other. Going afoot, too, is the last thing, let me assure you, a cowboy will do. "Well, don't you fail to mingle none," said Bill with cheerful ferocity, "on account of its being me. I crosses the trail the shorthorn like you over on the panhandle once and put him on fire and has plenty of fun with him." "Stop the play now, right here," said Tom Rollins, the HT range boss, who was sitting close at hand. "You all spring trouble round here and I'll be in it. Whatever's the matter with your people anyway? You're like a passel of sore-head dogs for more'n a week now. You're surely too many for me to sabe, and I declare gives you up." The boys started some grumbling reply, but the cook called them to supper just then, and, one animalism becoming overshadowed by another, they forgot their rancor and vague animosities in thoughts of supplying their hunger. Toward the last of the repast, Rollins rose, and going to another room began overlooking some entries in the ranch books. The pretty girl did not eat at the ranch table. She had little banquets in her own room. Just then she was in her room and began singing in a low tone some tender little love song that seemed born of a sigh and a tear. The boys at supper heard her, and their resentment of each other's existence began again to flame in their breasts and burn deeply in their eyes. None of these savages was in the least degree in love with the pretty girl either. They might have become so, all or any of them. The singing went on in a soft, cooing way that did not bring you the words, only the music. "What I says about my saddle a while back, I means," said Moore, finally, turning a dark look on Watkins. "See here," said Watkins in an exasperated tone. He was as vicious as Moore. "If you're pinting out for a war jig with me, don't fool around none for reasons, but just let her roll. Come a-running and don't bother none with ceremony." "Men don't have to have no reasons for crawling you none," said Moore. "You're fair game, you are. Anyone's licensed to chase you around just for fun and exercise." "You can gamble," said Watkins confidently. "Any man as chases me around much will regard it as a thrilling pastime. He won't get fat at it, none whatever." "As you all seems to feel that-a-way," said Moore, "I'll step out and shoot with you right now." "Well, I'll sure go you," said Watkins. They arose and stepped out at the door. It was gathering dark, but it was light enough to shoot by. The other cowboys followed in silence. Not one said a word in comment or interference. They were grave and serious, but passive. It is not good form to interfere with other people's duels in the Southwest. The pretty girl was still singing, and the strains fell softly on the ears of the cowboys. Every one, whether onlooker or principal, felt inspired with a licking, pleased anticipation of the blood to be soon set flowing. Nothing was said of distance. They separated to about 40 paces and turned to face each other. Each wore his Colt .45, the loosely buckled belt letting it rest low down on the right hip. Each threw down his big hat and stood at apparent ease with his thumbs caught in the pistol belt. "Shall you give the word or me?" said Moore. "You give it," said Watkins. "It'll be a funny passage in American history if you get your artillery to the front any sooner than I do then." "Be you ready?" asked Jack. "Sure." "Then, go." Bang, 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 went both pistols together with a rapidity not to be counted. Moore got a crease in his left shoulder, a mere wound to the flesh, and Watkins fell with a bullet in his side. Rollins, the range boss, came running out. He understood all at a look. Hastily examining Moore, he discovered that his hurt was nothing serious. The others carried Watkins into the house. "Take my pony saddled at the fence, Jack," said Rollins, "and pull your freight. This here man's gonna die." "Which I surely hopes he does," said Jack bitterly. "I'll go, though. I ain't got no use for none of these he shorthorns around the HT." So he took Rawlins's pony, and when he stopped riding in the morning, it was no marvel that the poor pony hung his head dejectedly while his flanks steamed and quivered. He was almost 100 miles from his last corn, and cooled his nervous muzzle as he took his morning drink in the Rio Pecos, a stream far to the west of the HT. "Some shooting scrape about their saddles, miss, that's all," so reported Rawlins to the pretty girl. "Isn't it horrible?" shuddered the pretty girl in reply. The next morning the pretty girl and her gnarled and twisted aunt paid the injured Watkins a visit. This sight so affected the other 3 cowboys that they at once saddled and rode away to the northwest to work some cattle over on the Ocate Mesa. They intended to be gone 3 months. They looked black and forbidding as they galloped away. "It's a pity Jack Moore ain't no better pistol shot," said one, as the picture of the pretty girl visiting the wounded Watkins arose in his mind. "That's whatever," assented the others. The pretty girl was full of sympathy for the stricken Watkins. It occurred to her, too, that his profile was clear and handsome. He was certainly very pale, and this stirred the depths of her feminine nature. She and her aunt came to see the invalid every day. Once the pretty girl said she would bring him a book to read and while away the hours, which seemed shod with lead. "I can't read," said Watkins in a tone of deepest shame. "I never learned. I should like to read, too, but there's no one to teach me. So that settles that." And the rascal expressed a deep sigh. Watkins lied. It was he who was the Princeton man. He said afterward that this lie was the only real good work he ever did in his life. So the pretty girl came every day and gave Watkins a reading lesson while the gnarled aunt read a book and watched them through the open door. "By the way," said Watkins one day, "where's Moore?" "Why?" asked the range boss, to whom the question was put. "You tell him," said Watkins, his eyes beginning to gather rage, "that when I get out I'll be looking for him with something besides a field glass." "Oh, no," said the pretty girl, rising and coming toward his couch. Her tone showed great disturbance and fear at the thought. As he gazed at her, the look changed in his eyes. Hate for Moore gave place to something else. "No," he said at last. "Tell him it's all right, Rawlins." The pretty girl thought him very noble. Watkins was out in 5 weeks and could go about the ranch. One night Rawlins thought he heard a pony in the yard and arose to remedy the matter. As he stepped out, a couple passed him in the moonlight. It was Watkins and the pretty girl. The caitiff's arm was around her. The best sentence in this story is, "When you aims to ride my saddle again, ask for it. If you can't talk, make signs, and if you can't make signs, shake a bush. But don't go stealing off no saddle of mine no more." This story is really interesting. The first time I read it, I wasn't sure it was right for the channel, but then my thoughts kept coming back to it and turning it over and over and over again. I really love how it's written. The dialogue is delightful. It's so expressive and natural and complex. There's a kind of masculine externality to everything about this story. It's written like a play. People are described by what they do and the mood they cast around them, but with no insight into their inner lives, thoughts, and feelings beyond what can be intuited by their behavior. It actually isn't clear whether these characters have much insight into their own thoughts and feelings, except perhaps for our clever Mr. Watkins. The sentence about the lie being the one good thing he did in his life is fantastic. This story also reminds me a bit of those fairy tales, perhaps because I've been reading so many fairy tales, where there's a beautiful princess and the castle is positively swarming with suitors and she isn't remotely interested in any of them. This is like that same story in a completely different setting. This is one of those stories with really impenetrable origins. It's attributed to a writer named O.H. Lewis, but then in parentheses beside it, it says Dan Quin and the Kansas City Star. I can't find out anything about O.H. Lewis or Dan Quin. Furthermore, there is nothing less searchable than a magazine called Short Stories, published by the Current Literature Publishing Company in New York. So all we really know is that this volume was published in April 1891, and that this story was originally published in the Kansas City Star sometime before that. There actually was a famous HT ranch in North Dakota. By 1890, it was, quote, the most notable ranch in the area, and by the turn of the 20th century, it was the biggest and most important ranch in the state. However, of course, this story doesn't take place in North Dakota. Rio Pecos is in New Mexico flowing into Texas. It's described as being far to the west of the HT. And Ocate Mesa is also in New Mexico, and it does say that this is in eastern New Mexico, so this is where we're at. Of course, I don't think it matters whether there was an actual historic HT ranch where this story takes place, but the author goes to some pains to identify pretty specific locations, maybe just to add some verisimilitude. This is also one of those stories where I tweaked a few words that the author wrote, including a word in the best sentence above. I honestly believe that Mr. Quin was just a man of his time, and he didn't mean anything especially racist or painful by his use of certain words. He doesn't go off on long paragraphs describing the attributes of certain groups or anything. He doesn't use offensive adjectives, but he does use racial descriptors where they wouldn't be used today and where I found them unnecessary. So I swapped out a noun and a verb for some non-racialized words that mean the same thing. If you listen all the way to the end of the video, you get to hear me make a little confession. Tonight's confession is that the house is getting painted, just the trim, the window frames, and the doors, and the guys who are doing it are lovely, but they are here all the time, and they have noisy tools, and they leave a fine film of sawdust on everything, and they are kind of cramping my style. All the spots where I usually hang out and work are kind of occupied, including my bathroom. Last week I couldn't bathe for 3 days because they were in there all day long, and then they said that the window shouldn't be closed so the paint can fully dry. And of course I want a good paint job. I'm investing in it, so I just sponged and waited. But the paint is a gorgeous, vibrant teal color, extremely unusual for this part of the country, and I really like how it looks. So I guess we just deal with the inconvenience for a while. This whole year has really been a kind of slow succession of various people coming in to install something or repair something or work on something, and each one brings their own truly unique kind of dirt, which can never really be cleaned until they're done doing whatever it is. Is this home ownership? I guess this is home ownership. But now it is home ownership of the house that will forever inspire arguments about whether it's blue or green, but it's also utterly distinctive and unmistakable and so fun. If you are interested in stories that are distinctive and unusual and that you won't hear anywhere else on YouTube, you should definitely subscribe to this channel. Twice a week, Restored Lore shares stories that are old, odd, and interesting, and you wouldn't want to miss anything. Please also support the channel and help me grow by dropping a like on this video, leaving me a comment, sharing with a friend. Thank you so much for the support, and I will see you in a few days. Old, odd, and obscure stories on YouTube. Really? Tonight's story is